All right, so you're diving into Bitcoin today. That tells me you're not just looking for the basics, you're ready to get into the nitty-gritty. So we're going to unpack not only how it works, but also why it's such a controversial and potentially world-changing idea.
That's exactly the approach we need. Because understanding Bitcoin isn't just about the tech, it's about the philosophy behind it, the challenges it faces, and yes, even the mystery surrounding its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Okay, color me intrigued. But before we get to Satoshi's secret lair, let's ground ourselves. Can you give us that elevator pitch definition of Bitcoin? What's the core concept here?
At its heart, Bitcoin is digital money, but with a twist. It uses a decentralized network, meaning no single entity controls it, no banks, no governments, just a global community of users and their computers.
So that's like the internet of money. But how does that actually work? How do you prevent chaos, fraud, all the things that usually make centralized systems necessary?
That's where the blockchain comes in. Imagine a digital ledger, duplicated across thousands of computers. Every transaction is recorded there, chronologically. And once a block of transactions is added, it's virtually impossible to tamper with.
Wait, so it's like a public record of every Bitcoin transaction ever made. Isn't that a privacy nightmare?
That's a common misconception. While the blockchain is transparent, it doesn't reveal your personal information. It uses a system of public and private keys. Think of them like account numbers and passwords to ensure security and anonymity.
Okay, that makes sense. But who's keeping this giant ledger up to date? Who's deciding which transactions are legit?
That's the job of the miners.
Yeah.
These are people or companies with powerful computers competing to solve complex mathematical problems. The winner gets to add the next block to the blockchain and is rewarded with freshly minted Bitcoin.
So it's like a digital gold rush. But instead of digging in the dirt, they're crunching numbers. That sounds incredibly energy intensive, and I know that's been a major criticism of Bitcoin.
You're absolutely right. The energy consumption of Bitcoin mining is a valid concern, and we'll definitely delve into that debate later. There are also various efforts to make mining more sustainable, using renewable energy sources or more efficient algorithms.
Glad to hear it. But let's back up for a second. We're talking about a system that's challenging the very notion of money as we know it. What drove its creation in the first place?
There were many factors at play, but a key driver was the 2008 financial crisis. People lost trust in centralized institutions and sought alternative systems that were more transparent and resilient.
So Bitcoin was born out of this desire for a decentralized, trustless system. That's a pretty powerful origin story.
It is, and it taps into a deeper philosophical debate about the nature of money, power, and control. Bitcoin proponents see it as a tool for financial freedom and empowerment, especially in regions with unstable currencies or limited access to banking.
I'm seeing how this goes way beyond just tech specs. But before we get too philosophical, let's hammer down some of Bitcoin's key characteristics. You mentioned decentralization. What else makes it unique?
One key feature is its limited supply. Unlike traditional currencies, which can be printed endlessly, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. This scarcity is built into the code and is achieved through the process of halving.
Halving? That sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
Every 4 years, the reward that miners receive for adding a block to the blockchain is cut in half. This controlled reduction in the rate of Bitcoin creation helps regulate inflation and ensures its value doesn't erode over time.
So it's like a built-in scarcity mechanism, almost like a digital version of gold. But how does that impact the price of Bitcoin? I'm guessing it's been a wild ride.
You're not wrong. We'll explore the price volatility later, but understanding halving is crucial to grasping how Bitcoin's value is perceived and how it might play out in the long run. This most recent halving, in April 2024, reduced the reward to just 3.125 Bitcoin per block.
Wow. So we're already more than halfway through the total Bitcoin supply. That's a pretty big milestone. It feels like we're witnessing a monetary experiment in real time, with huge potential implications.
And that's exactly what makes Bitcoin so captivating. It's not just a technology, it's a social and economic experiment that's challenging our fundamental assumptions about money and finance.
I'm already hooked. But before we dive into the deep end of this experiment, let's take a closer look at the brains behind it all. Who is this mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto? And why all the secrecy?
Satoshi Nakamoto is the pseudonymous creator of Bitcoin, and their true identity remains one of the biggest mysteries in the tech world. We only have the Bitcoin white paper and some online forum posts to glean insights into their thinking.
So we're talking about a true enigma, potentially a person, a group, or even an AI. Who knows? But why all the secrecy? What's the motivation behind remaining anonymous?
There are a few possible explanations. Some speculate it was a way to protect themselves from legal or government scrutiny, especially in the early days when Bitcoin's future was uncertain. Others believe it was a deliberate choice to keep the focus on the technology itself, rather than on any individual or group.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like they wanted Bitcoin to stand on its own merits as a truly decentralized and leaderless system. But let's be real. The mystery just adds to the intrigue, right? It's like a real-life treasure hunt, except the treasure is knowledge.
It definitely fuels speculation and fascination.
Hmm.
And while we may never know the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, their creation has undoubtedly left an indelible mark on the world.
Okay, mystery acknowledged. But now I'm itching to understand how this revolutionary system actually functions in the real world. How do Bitcoin transactions work? Walk me through it.
Imagine you want to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. You open your digital wallet, which is like a banking app. But specifically for Bitcoin, you enter the recipient's public key, which is like their Bitcoin address and the amount you want to send.
So it's a bit like sending money through a payment app, but instead of bank accounts, we're using these public keys. What happens next?
Your wallet then creates a transaction using your private key to digitally sign it. This signature proves you're the legitimate owner of the Bitcoin you're sending. The transaction is then broadcast to the Bitcoin network.
Broadcast, so it's not a direct transfer like with a bank.
Correct. Your transaction is essentially announced to the network of Bitcoin nodes, those computers we talked about that maintain a copy of the blockchain.
Ah, right. The decentralized network comes back into play. So my transaction is out there, floating around in the digital ether. What happens then?
Miners pick up your transaction and verify its validity, ensuring you have enough Bitcoin to spend and haven't already spent it elsewhere. Then they try to include it in the next block they add to the blockchain.
It's like a competition, with miners vying to add transactions to their block, and what's in it for them?
They get rewarded with newly minted Bitcoin for each block they successfully add, along with any transaction fees attached to those transactions. It's this incentive structure that drives the security and integrity of the network.
So it's like a self-sustaining ecosystem, with miners playing a crucial role in keeping things running smoothly. But I've heard that Bitcoin transactions can sometimes take a while to be confirmed. Why is that?
You're right. Unlike traditional payment systems that can process transactions almost instantly, Bitcoin transactions can take minutes or even hours, depending on network congestion and the fees offered.
Fees. So every Bitcoin transaction have a fee attached to it.
Not necessarily. You can choose to include a fee, and doing so incentivizes miners to prioritize your transaction. The higher the fee, the faster it's likely to be confirmed.
It's like a bidding war among transactions, with the highest bidders getting preferential treatment. But how do you know how much of a fee to include?
Most wallets recommend a fee based on current network conditions. There are also websites that track average fees, helping you decide how much to pay for faster confirmation. It's a balancing act between speed and cost.
Oh, I'm seeing how this all fits together, but let's talk about that energy consumption issue again. Isn't all this mining? With powerful computers running 24/7, incredibly energy intensive.
It absolutely is. It's a valid criticism of Bitcoin, and it's something the community is actively trying to address. There are ongoing efforts to develop more energy-efficient mining hardware and to encourage the use of renewable energy sources for mining operations.
That's good to hear. But even with those efforts, isn't there a fundamental tension between decentralization and energy consumption? The more decentralized and secure the network becomes, the more computational power it requires, right?
You hit on a key challenge. Finding a sustainable balance between security, decentralization, and energy efficiency is a major focus for the future of Bitcoin, and there's a lot of debate about the best approach.
It sounds like a complex problem with no easy answers. But let's move on to another potential issue. If Bitcoin is supposed to be a currency, but transactions can be slow and expensive, doesn't that limit its practicality for everyday use?
That's a key question a lot of people have. Can Bitcoin really be a practical currency for everyday transactions if it's slow and expensive?
Yeah, is it even possible?
Well, it's true that Bitcoin's current limitations make it less practical for buying coffee or groceries. Those high fees and confirmation times are a definite hurdle. But remember, Bitcoin is still a relatively young technology, and it's constantly evolving.
So there's hope for faster, cheaper Bitcoin transactions in the future. What are some of the potential solutions being explored?
Oh, there are a lot of exciting developments happening. One promising solution is the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 technology built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. It enables much faster and cheaper transactions by moving them off the main blockchain.
So it's like a separate highway for smaller transactions, freeing up the main blockchain for larger, more complex ones.
Exactly. The Lightning Network is gaining traction. With more wallets and services integrating it, it has the potential to make Bitcoin much more practical for everyday use.
That's encouraging. But even if the technology improves, there's still the issue of price volatility. I heard stories of people buying pizza with Bitcoin one day, and the next day that pizza's worth thousands of dollars. How can a currency be useful if its value is so unpredictable?
You're right, price volatility is a major concern. It makes it difficult for businesses to accept Bitcoin as payment, and for individuals to use it as a store of value. There are a few factors driving this volatility, including market speculation, regulatory uncertainty, and the relatively small size of the Bitcoin market compared to traditional assets.
So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. For Bitcoin to become more stable, it needs wider adoption. But wider adoption is hindered by its instability. How do we break out of that cycle?
It's a challenge,
Ooh.
but there are potential solutions. One is increased institutional adoption. If major companies and financial institutions start using and holding Bitcoin, it could bring more stability to the market.
So the more mainstream Bitcoin becomes, the less volatile it's likely to be.
That's the thinking. And there are signs that this is happening. We're seeing more companies accepting Bitcoin as payment. And even some institutional investors are starting to dip their toes into the crypto waters.
Okay, so maybe Bitcoin's future as a currency isn't so far-fetched after all. But let's step back from the practicalities for a moment and explore some of the broader implications of Bitcoin. What are some of the potential societal impacts, both positive and negative, of a decentralized currency?
That's a big question, and one that deserves careful consideration. On the positive side, Bitcoin has the potential to empower individuals and communities, especially those who are underserved by traditional financial systems. It can provide greater financial freedom and access to global markets.
So for people in countries with unstable currencies
Yeah,
or limited banking infrastructure, Bitcoin could be a lifeline.
absolutely. And it could also facilitate cross-border payments, making it easier and cheaper to send money around the world. This could have significant implications for remittances, international trade, and even humanitarian aid.
That's a powerful vision. But what about the potential downsides? What are some of the risks or concerns associated with a decentralized currency?
Well, one concern is the potential for illicit activities, because Bitcoin transactions can be relatively anonymous. It's been used for money laundering, drug trafficking, and other illegal activities. However, it's important to note that cash is still the preferred currency for most criminals.
So while Bitcoin can be used for illicit purposes, it's not necessarily more susceptible than traditional systems.
That's right. And law enforcement agencies are developing tools and techniques to track Bitcoin transactions and combat criminal activity. Another concern is the lack of consumer protection if you lose your Bitcoin or if you're scammed. There's no central authority to turn to for help.
So it's a bit of a buyer beware situation. Users need to be extra vigilant and take responsibility for their own security.
Exactly. It's crucial to educate yourself about the risks and to use reputable wallets and exchanges. The decentralized nature of Bitcoin means there's no safety net, so personal responsibility is paramount.
Okay, I'm getting a much clearer picture of both the potential benefits and challenges of Bitcoin. But ultimately, isn't its success dependent on wider adoption? If people don't use it, it doesn't matter how good the technology is, right?
You're absolutely right. Adoption is key. And we're at a fascinating point in Bitcoin's history where its future is still uncertain. Will it become a mainstream currency? Will it remain a niche asset for tech-savvy investors? Or will it evolve into something entirely new that we haven't even imagined yet?
That's the million Bitcoin question, isn't it? And only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this deep dive has given me a much deeper appreciation for the complexity, the innovation, and the sheer audacity of Bitcoin. It's a truly revolutionary idea that's challenging our fundamental assumptions about money, technology, and the nature of trust.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Bitcoin is more than just a technology. It's a reflection of our evolving relationship with money, power, and control in the digital age. It's a story that's still being written, and it's one that we should all be paying attention to.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I encourage you to continue exploring, learning, and asking questions. The world of Bitcoin is constantly changing, and there's always something new to discover.
And if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts after this deep dive, please don't hesitate to share them with us. We're always eager to continue the conversation.
Until next time, keep diving deep.